Only God could rescue me. Only God could set me free. Only God. Only God. Only God.
Hello, welcome to Only God Rescued Me. I'm Lisa Meister, your host. And today I am very excited to bring to you a friend that I got to meet this year at Call to Peace. They are a domestic abuse ministry that has started featuring organized abuse, which includes ritual abuse. And I've gotten to speak there in the last couple years. And this past year, I got to meet Sharon, who is a survivor. I got to be friends with her. I got to spend some time together, who has quite the story. And it was just fascinating to meet her. And she's become a friend. Just, you'll fall in love with her. She's just amazing. And what has really fascinated me was I don't get to meet everybody on my podcast and get to spend time with them. So this is really amazing. This is really fun. But most people, it's just kind of virtual, getting to meet them virtually. But in person is all the more special, all the more exciting. I got to hear more of her story in real time. All stories are impactful, but seeing the abuse affects the lives throughout the whole life is really something that I want you to take in. The survivors listening, you know, but for those that are trying to understand and trying to get your head around what's it like for a survivor. You're listening to the stories, but I want you to also take in the impact that it has on the entire life, even before the survivor understands that they've been ritually abused. And Sharon's story really personifies that in incredible ways. So I really want you to take in her whole life and try to put yourself in her shoes as she's trying to figure out what's the matter, what's going on with me, how does my life fit, and what are the pieces, and why am I making the decisions that I'm making, and how is this happening, and the confusion that's there, and how society lets her down. And I think that's the impact that Sharon has had on me. And I'm just really, I really think that her story is very important, and that every survivor needs to come and tell their story and to know that this is your moment to be seen, because survivors are pushed aside everywhere. And this is your moment, Sharon. I'm really glad you were willing to come on. And I want you to know that I see you and that God sees you, and everything that's happened to you was traumatic. Everything was evil. Everything was horrible. And it all matters. It all matters. And I'm just honored that you're here today. Thank you for coming on my show.
Gosh, Lisa, thank you for asking me. It's really my pleasure and my privilege to be here, and for saying these words that I've never heard in my life, that I don't matter and no one wants to hear it. And so I've been waiting for this for years, just absolute years, to be able to share my story.
Well, I'm really, really happy that you have the opportunity, because people should hear your story, and it should be with ears to hear and a mind that's like, I am going to try to wrap my head around it. I may not understand it, but I'm going to try to put myself in your shoes and have empathy for you and care for you. And that's what I believe that this wonderful community at Only God Rescued Me has. So welcome to a place that can receive your story with love and compassion. So you were not born in America.
No, I was born in America.
You were. Okay.
First generation. My parents were both from Holland and both families came from Holland, and they all knew each other, my mother's family and my father's family from The Hague. And um, my mother's family first came over to America. Um, I don't know if it was, I guess, right after the war, right after World War II. And so that included my grandma and grandpa, because I call the Dutch ones Oma and Opa. They're all Dutch. That's how I distinguish. And first the uncles, my mother's brothers, and then the grandparents, and then my aunt and my mother came. So that's was the Van Breda family. And then my father's family stayed in the Netherlands, but he came over and married my mother. And so my home was the perfect home on the outside. Everything was perfect, had to be perfect. And my mother was very cruel to me. I didn't know that she was that cruel. It didn't really dawn on me until I became a mother. And I began to see the discrepancies and how I treated and loved and protected my kids, and how I would never say or do the things that my mother did to me. So I was always the guilty one in the house, and everything I was doing to upset my mother, it was all about my mother. Of course, now I know I didn't know things like narcissism, but they were both narcissists, and I was expected to be perfect. And when I would ask my mom as I was older, why don't you ever like compliment me? Why are you always putting everything down? She says, well, you're supposed to be like, if I got straight A's, which I did, she would say, that's expected of you. And even, my figure and the way I stood, everything had to be perfect. She even put pictures of models in the cupboards, the pantry, so that not to, although I was never allowed to eat anything in the house without um, asking, and it was very, very strict, a very strict home. So it wasn't loving. She was not protective, compassionate with me. When I was thinking,
Now, I want to point out that this was normal to you because you didn't realize this until you were a mom.
right,
So, as a child, this is normal.
this is normal. Yeah, and she used to beat on me a lot, and she would go into rages all the time, and I wasn't allowed to cry, and it was hard not to cry. So I became an internal crier. And I think it was in the ages of third grade to sixth grade, I can remember just crying myself to sleep every night quietly and feeling this pain that just trembled throughout my body. And the words, you are ugly, you are stupid, you have no personality, and no one will ever want to marry you, would just repeat. Now, looking back, I realized that that was mind control. But then because I just like, where did these words come from? And every night. And I really felt it. I just felt like I was just an unlovable person, and I didn't feel love. And I felt that I deserved this. My parents fought a lot, and I've always been like an introspective child. And I used to think I would want to be a marriage therapist because my parents would fight and I would try to intervene. And we always thought, well, they just need a divorce. And I thought, well, who would I live with? And I thought, my father. I would live with my father because my mother's so mean to me. And of course, that would have been a horrible thing too. But I also remember thinking that, oh, but if I lived with him, he would just make me his wife. And I was probably thinking more domestically, but it's these weird thoughts because in a sense, he did treat me as his wife. Um, and so,
Do you want to explain
well,
in a sense?
I think what I understood later after I had memories was that when you don't have anyone to go to protect you, and I didn't, you're going to pick somebody to put on a pedestal. And I picked my father, and I saw him as the perfect one because I was with my mother every day, and he wasn't around us. I mean, he was home at night, but so I had him up on a pedestal. And because I just didn't know, I just didn't understand so much. And so, but I did have memories of him my first memory was of him raping me. So we had an incestuous relationship that I had no idea of. As a matter of fact, just before my memories came in my 20s, I was watching a movie from Lifetime, and it was about, I can't remember the name, but it was father daughter incest. And I was sick, just sick to my stomach watching this and crying and thinking, how could anybody ever go through this? This girl, I was just like rolled in a ball. And I thought, thank God this never happened to me. And it wasn't much later that I had my memories. So, but all this kind of had to explode. I had terrible panic attacks starting at puberty, and I told my mom that I needed help, and she would always dismiss everything. She would say, "Oh, that's just a phase you're in," and we weren't allowed to get sick. Kids didn't get headaches. You just go to school, and everything was denied. And if something did happen, I had to go to the doctor. She would, I was very allergic to mosquitoes, and I would be covered with mosquito bites. And one time one got so large and infected, she had to take me, and that really upset her. So the doctor put my arm in a sling, and she said that I just did all of this for attention. I mean, it was at every corner she diminished me, and I'm making her life miserable. And she truly like hated me. And I could go on, but I won't. You get the idea. And so with the panic attacks, it was just awful because there were so many things as I entered high school. My feelings were just well, they were shame. They were 100% shame. And I didn't know that. And I just thought that, well, that basically my mother told me when I was a little girl, and I asked her if about my birth. Oh, she turned around and looked at me and said, "Oh, you were a mistake. You weren't wanted. I was on birth control. We found you in the gutter." So I was just kind of left dumbfounded. I never heard the story, and that so
Sure does. Absolutely.
thought I truly was, and I just didn't belong here in this world. And I felt very much alone. My family was very isolated. We never went to church. There was no Bible in the house. We're unbelievers. And I wasn't really allowed to do anything. My mother wasn't going to drive. She wasn't going to pay for that. And she did tell me later that my father kept her on an extremely tight budget. And so she actually couldn't, but she wouldn't either. So I was very isolated. And I'm kind of that person anyway. I would just have one friend, one special friend, and that was about it. But in high school, I was so insecure that I didn't uh, I didn't want boys looking at me. I thought I was so ugly. And if a boy said hi to me, I thought that he wasn't really saying hi to me. And if I say hi back, he'll all laugh, like make fun of me. I don't know where all this came from, but I was told by my friend later that I had a reputation. It stuck up. And it was really because I just felt so unworthy. And I would hang my hair over my face to cover my nose. And I thought, my first job, I'm gonna get a nose job. I mean, I just was I put myself just so disproportionate. I saw myself as just such a loser, and no one could come near to my face I couldn't have eye contact. I couldn't eat in public. If someone was going to do my hair, they couldn't get close to me. Going to the doctor or the dentist was frightening if they were coming close to my face or my mouth. And I had to hide a bottle of whiskey in my closet to take a shot to try to calm me and then hope that it wasn't long enough to get through these things.
So, what age did that start?
The first time that I drank hit my parents. Well, I don't think it was the first time I drank, but hit their liquor cabinet while they were out. I was 13, and I had such a peace that I never felt before. And that's when I realized that there was no anxiety. Everything was beautiful. It was in place of knowing that peace of God. It was in the alcohol. Alcohol became, I guess, my God. And I didn't like that I had to do that because other people didn't have to do that. So why did I have to do that? And I didn't like it. I didn't like having to use anything. I just wanted to feel like that normally. But I couldn't, and it just kept getting worse. And then the fear of these panic attacks just grew and grew. And it was to the point at 17 years old, I said, that's it. I can't live this way. I can't live another 50 years like this. I have to end it. And, our belief was that when you die, it's gone, it's over. Your life's over, it's blackness. You no longer exist. So, and I used to burn myself with cigarettes and cut myself and scratch myself. And if I wasn't, I was dating a boy that would do it. He was very violent with me. So I seemed to be attracted to that. And I think because it happened a lot more in my home than I remember because I didn't know them, but I was dissociating from so much. But so I was really trying to dig in. It was hard, but I was really trying to dig in my wrist and end it. And a voice spoke to me and said, why don't you just hang in there? It can't get any worse. And I was, what? And who is that? What is that voice? And I didn't know, but I thought, whoever that voice is, it knows. It knows me. And so it gave me hope. And I was grateful. I put the knife down that I didn't have to do that, but I didn't kill myself, but I was really questioning God. And I wanted God. And I knew a lot of the kids in my neighborhood that I went to school with belonged to like a campus club. They were Christian. And it's like I knew that I couldn't be there. I wasn't allowed there. For whatever reason, I just knew that I couldn't be there.
Can we pause just a moment to talk about the suicide and the self-harm? You didn't know why. You had no idea why the panic attacks and why I've decided to end it. I'm going to just stop it all right here. There's nothing to explain any of that
I just thought I was a freak.
because you had the perfect family.
I was a freak, and that's all I knew.
Can we just stop a moment and take that in? And you at that age, so young, in the cognitive dissonance of my life is perfect, I'm broken, I'm going to end it. And then God stepping in and saying, let's hang in there a little bit longer. That's amazing.
It gives me chills.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's God seeing you.
that was God.
Yeah.
I didn't know that it was God. I didn't know what it was. All I knew it was hope. Let's call it hope.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful.
The first drop of hope that I ever had. So 17, I would have been a senior. God did a few more things. I graduated with high honors and I won senior standout best personality. So already that countered. And I figured that had to be God. And I was going to be married in a few years. But I still I knew this feeling of my ugliness was not normal. It was so bad. It was just not normal. And I thought to myself finally, because it bothered me, and I thought, you know, if there was somebody else who looked just like me, would you say these things to them? And I thought, no, I would never say that. And I said, so if you think you're so ugly, Sharon, these conversations I had with myself, if you think you're so ugly, do you want to throw yourself in a big grab bag pail? And then you get to pick another person out, another look, but you don't get to see what you pick? And I said, oh, no. Honestly, helped me to stop hating the way I looked. Now, it took many years, but I realized that self-shame. And because I just didn't understand why, but I just was hideous and couldn't see why anybody would want me or like me but it was from that programming that
But did you have anybody in your life that saw you at that point, loved you, liked you,
No, my boyfriend who I had for 3 years was just I always got repeats of, my parents, and he was very much like my mother, and, like, when I one time we were in a pool, and my arms were all cut up, and he grabbed me by my wrist, and I flinched because I was always hiding. Then I had to hide what I do to myself, which is very difficult. And he saw it and he would abuse me more. He would squeeze even more. So he was so much like my mother. It was like when I told my mother, and obviously because stuff had happened to him. I mean, I think everyone I feel like in my life, I was a trigger to other abused people who were not aware of it. So they just took it out on me. They don't want to see that part. And, my mother discounted my anxiety and panic attacks. And so I told him, and then he did too. I mean, it was like he got angry whenever anything happened, he would just start hitting me. So I just talked to a friend, one of our friends from way back then, and I hadn't talked to her since then, our teens. And I said, "What do you remember?" She says, "Well, I remember you and that boy. And he was always beating on you, and I had to pull you out of the gutter one time." I mean, it was just my life.
Wow.
I don't remember that, but I think these things happen so often. I just remember bits and pieces. So it's just it was normal to me because that's the house I came from. Like I remember the
So
last,
when you're telling yourself, "No one will ever love me," you're talking about, "This is my life. This is the way it's always been. This is the way it always will be."
yeah, I think so. I think this was part of, I had an aunt one time say, "Oh," when I was a teenager, I was very tall. And she said, "You should be a model." And I didn't believe her. If somebody did say something nice, as rare as it was, I felt that they were making fun of me. And but it really, the people that I chose in my life were not able to compliment, just like my mother could never get the compliment. So, and my boyfriend was very jealous, very jealous. Of course, he was cheating on me the whole time, and I didn't know that, but he was. And but if he saw a guy look at me, man, he'd beat me up and eat and get fat. We watched the Joni Erickson. No, it wasn't that movie. The movie with the skier who became paralyzed. He said, "I wish that would happen to you because then nobody would want you." And it's interesting because my mother told me a few years later that she had breast cancer and she had a mastectomy, and she said that my father told her, "Oh, good, now nobody will want you." So this is like, the repeats of my mother and me. Just the wonderful gift about this is that God says it stopped with you. And so, but at that time, I was still not aware. So then in my senior year, my future husband came into my life, and it's kind of basically the same thing, but I was just so in love with him, and I thought he was so handsome. And I was always seen to be like a victim. Like perpetrators would be like after me. They would find me. And he, in the backgrounds, would see this and go after them and save me. I mean, it was like, I felt like, wow, he was the first protector I ever felt. And I just, I fell in love with him for that. He protects me. He goes after those guys, and his adrenaline's going, and they almost hurt his girl. And nobody ever did that before. So I was in love. But he too wasn't able. He had his own trauma that he couldn't face or speak about, and he wasn't able to say anything nice or to handle what was later about to come when I got my memories. Jesus was really coming into my life, and my mother, in her world, I think both of us were both seekers. She's passed on. And while she was a victim and she victimized me, she was also searching. And I think Jesus came into both of our lives separately at the same time. I would love to have a conversation with her now about that, but we couldn't get to that point. But we both found Jesus at the same time and talked about it. And we're watching Christian TV, and I would watch the 700 Club, and we talk about God. And I had to fight through a lot of demonic attacks to really have him in my life. But I knew he was there because of these horrible panic attacks. I just started to really just pray, Jesus, Jesus, I'll do this for you. I just knew his love right away. It just also, I can't say exactly when I was born again, but all these events were happening that were miraculous. When I turned to him and I faced my anxiety or fears, he would just fill me with the Holy Spirit.
And how old were you?
So at this time, I would say I was 20 because I was experiencing his miracles before that at work. And as long as I turned to him and said, you take over, God, he would just, everything would just work out like a miracle. I just couldn't. And so it was that my mother was in Al-Anon at the time because of my father. And so she would pass me things and I would soak it in. And this relationship with Jesus just grew. And it was really my lifeline because I knew he was real and I knew he loved me and I wanted him. I always wanted God. As a matter of fact, I can remember my mother and I going to the Christian bookstore for the first time together. And I was so excited. I'd done the sinner's prayer, gave my life over to Jesus on the 700 Club. And I got my first Bible and Christian tapes, and I bought myself a little cross. And I was just so excited and thrilled that I could be a child of God. But it was just kind of like I was searching for him and he's coming to me. So bam, he just really came in strong. And then I went to therapy. My husband and I were both alcoholic, but I considered him the alcoholic and not me because I was a controlled drinker. And so I didn't want to drink. I didn't want us to drink. It was a miserable life. And I would tell him, I said, let's not drink. I said, you stop, I'll stop. Get this out of our lives. And he said, I don't have a problem. You have a problem. You do something. You do something about it. So I went to the therapist and when I was at 22 and I told her, I have these I was still struggling with panic attacks. Well, I still had lots of panic attacks. I had them for quite a while. And I was having problems with people because I always felt like I was being attacked and I would get this anxiety. And so when I told her that only Jesus can help me with the panic attacks, only Jesus, I've tried everything, but Jesus is only one. If I submit 100% to him and walk through it, he turns it into a miracle. And she kept saying, no, 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 it's you. And I said, no. I said, you can't know if you don't know. I said, no, it's Jesus. But she asked, what was my earliest memory? And I didn't really remember much. And so she said she could remember all the way back. I don't know, maybe even to her birth, but definitely from an infant. And she said, is there anything back there? And so I started at night praying and saying, Lord, is there something? And every time I would get this very sick feeling in my stomach. And then I'd have to stop. And I kept trying every night to go a little further and a little further. And then the memory came when I was 3 years old. And my mother had taken me and my brother to Holland. And because of the bad state of her marriage, that she needed to get away. So she left my brother and I with my Oma and Opa, my father's parents. And there, my grandfather, the memory came, I was up in the corner of the room watching, as he put me between his legs. And I could see my brother on the other side of the door. And he just kind of had his head towards the door because he knew what was going on. I clearly think stuff happened to him too, but there was nothing he could do about it. And basically we were raised up. We were both raised as there's hopeless. There's nothing you can do about it anyway. So I was just devastated. My grandfather had just recently, maybe like a year before that, passed away, and I had gotten an announcement in the mail from Holland that said, Opa, like he was a loving, all this. And I always knew he was bad. I just couldn't stand him. I knew he was dirty. I knew he was bad. And so when that memory came up, I was just like, oh my gosh, I was a mess. And I was in such a bad shape. I even had a drink before my next therapy session, which you're not supposed to do, but I was that shook up over it. And I told her, and her reaction to it was, well, what are you going to do about it? I thought, and I said the weirdest thing. I said, I bite it off. I said I didn't know what to say, but I feel her reaction was totally wrong. And then she went on to say how she loves doing that. And I'm like, how to tell anyway, this was not the right therapist for me. So I didn't go there much longer.
Can I just say, just stopping there, that we should stop and take in how horrible of a reaction to get when this is your first memory. This is your first disclosure. And to be met with that adds to the trauma of what happened to you. You should be met with compassion and with help and with shock and horror, and somebody to help relieve the trauma and not to exacerbate the trauma. And I'm really sorry that that happened to you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think I have always downplayed my life and my memories, the trauma, always. And if I do tell someone, there's that little laugh behind it,
Sure.
and just because I know, they're going to be like, oh, this, because no one I ever told took it in, except the first therapist that I saw after my memories. So, but with that memory, just kind of went back down into hiding, because really, if I'd been with somebody else, another therapist, we could have opened up that Pandora's box. But it's all in God's time. So I wasn't ready, and God had a lot to do to ready me for that. So then what
And
happened?
it's very kind of you to frame it that way.
Yeah, because I do see how God is so good. He's so gracious and kind. He knows just what we can handle, and he wants us healed in the most perfect way, in the most easiest way.
He does. But I just want to put this out there too, for people that are hearing disclosures, how you respond to disclosures, you can either amplify the trauma, or so you can make the trauma worse, or you can help bring it down for the person who's disclosing. And that means that you're in a position, because you're hearing, to impact the person one way or the other. You are now part of the trauma because they have chosen to disclose to you for whatever reason. You're now part of it. How are you going to impact their trauma? Be a safe person. Be a compassionate person. Be someone that you can be a soft listener. Don't feel like you're the one that has to be there validating everything they're telling you, and by gum, they're going to have to prove it to you. Be kind, right? Like, how hard is that? And as Christians, especially, have the compassion of Jesus. People that came to him were met with compassion. We should be the same. How different would it have been for you when you walked into her office and disclosed that to you if she would have been kind and compassionate?
Would have been the exact opposite. I don't know. I would be like, it would have been the first time that I would have ever experienced compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. So just an aside, but let's learn from this.
Exactly.
And let's also explain to you that the horrificness of that situation and how it should not have been that way for you. So let's go back and revisit and say, hey, this was wrong. And maybe take that the sting of that out maybe a little bit. That if you look at that situation, she was in the wrong.
She was in the wrong, most definitely. Yeah, I didn't last there much longer after that. And my feelings were that, well, he's dead, so good. But that's a lie. And I just went on. I was still miserable in my life. So then what happened was, so I'm a young mom now, and I'm learning through my daughter how things are really different. And my mom and I, of course, were spending more time together because I'm home with my baby, and you kind of reconnect with your mom when you become a mother. And so she's sharing a few tidbits about things, about my dad. And one of the things were that he doesn't believe in rape. And I was like, what? And I couldn't believe it. He really fell off off the pedestal of that one, amongst other things that she had revealed to me. And so I wish she had revealed more, but I got what I got. And so I went to my father and confronted him. And he just sat there, his old cocky self in his chair. And I said, "You don't believe in rape?" And he says, "No." And I said, "You're kidding me." And he said, "No, women want it. They allow it." And I was just horrified. I said, "How can this, my make-believe, perfect, how can he think such a thing?" That was my mother's birthday, like 2 months after that. And I left my work early to go get her a birthday present. And then she was going to pick my daughter up, who was 1, almost 2, from preschool. And I was going to take her out for a birthday. So I left work early. I got to the mall. It was hot. It was in June. And I drive up to the covered parking spot, and I see these two guys dressed nice, like they work at the shoe store, with duffel bags, kind of at the entrance, the bridge that goes into the mall. I get this spot up close to it, and I pull in and say, thank you, Jesus, for this parking spot. It's just something my mother and I just thank Jesus for everything. Opened the car door and was changing my shoes to more comfortable shoes. And at that time, those two guys just overtook the car and said, "Shut up or we'll kill you." And they both have knives in each of my sides. And this is where the Holy Spirit took over, and I just began in my head saying, "Jesus loves me. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. Lord, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." And this just went over and over and over. And this to me was so huge, because the Lord forgive them, they do not know what they do was completely the Holy Spirit to teach me about forgiveness right at the get-go, because I'm a very forgiving person. But I knew that Jesus loves me, this I know, but I didn't know the Lord forgives me. And I didn't know that he said that on the cross. Even though I had my Bible and I read it one time, it kind of went over my head. So I just kept saying it over and over. And they drove me around. This was in West Covina. And, they drove me around, and then they got to this Irwindale Parkway dam, and they parked, and they started going through my purse, and my self-esteem, of course, was still low. So because they pulled out, I was a vault teller at the time, and they pulled out the bank keys, and they looked at them, and I thought, "Oh no, now the bank is going to have to change out all the keys." Bank of America's pretty cheap bank. So I thought, they're going to be so mad at me that they have to have this expense to change out all those keys, because that would have been, of course, what my mother would have said. And so, and then they started talking in their own little special language to each other. And I just sat there. I kept praying to God, "If there's something I need to do, tell me what to do." And he was silent. So I stayed silent. And then they took off again up until the foothills, and they kept driving up to dead ends along the foothills. And I thought, well, I guess this is it. They're going to kill me and dump me here in the foothills, because we've heard those stories on the news. So this is where my life ends. And I said, "Jesus, I would rather be home sitting by you than here in this world because I just don't like this world. So it's okay. It's okay. And then I thought, no, I said, I can't die. I have this daughter. I have to raise her. Nobody else can do it. And I have to live. I just begged him. But in no time, the Holy Spirit just filled me. And God said, you will not die. And I was so filled with love and joy that it didn't matter what they did at that point. I mean, I honestly didn't care because I was going home to raise my daughter, and that's all I cared about. And I loved being a mom. And I only had one daughter at that time. And I say my daughter saved my life. And they did in many ways. And so I just didn't care. And I had all these horrible imaginings that they were going to drive the car off the cliff with me in it and down in the dam. I said, I don't care because I'm going to get out. I'm going to swim to the top and I'm going to get help and I'm going to get home and I'm going to raise my daughter, all these things. But they kept driving high up the mountain and they got to their destination. And then I got really scared. I just remember shaking so hard. And they told me to get out of the car. And I knew that if I said the name of Jesus, that any demonic, it could stop it, but I couldn't get the name Jesus out. So I just begged them not to do this, not to get them, just take the car, take everything, just don't get yourselves into more trouble, just go. And they didn't. But then fast forward to when one of the guys was raping me, a voice in my head said, Sharon, you can do this. You've done this before. And I was like, what? I got in this confused state. And then I had that little cross that I had bought myself. And he picked it up and he went and he threw it down and got off of me and walked away. And so they left. They left me there. And as I was walking back to the road, I was thinking, I know you're going to bring me a nice lady to pick me up, God. And God said to me, this will never happen to you again. And after that, I never, ever had fear. A lot of times the reason why I had to drink at night was because my husband didn't get home until very late hours of the night. And I just always had this one eye open looking down the hall for somebody to come. And the drink just calmed me. And so I never, ever had that fear again. At that point, I was still drinking though, but I knew it. This was never going to happen. Didn't understand the whole thing behind it. And then there were my panties that were dropped on the way back up to the road. So at least I had my underwear. And then a car with two guys came and I ran out of the street and they gave me a sweatshirt and I said, get me to a phone, get me to a phone. And I told them what happened. And I think, there was this haze of just kind of confusion, just a haze over the car. They were like asking me where I lived. And I said, just get me to a phone. And the car kept going up the mountain and yet nobody said anything. And all of a sudden there was a cop at the side of the road. And so I jumped out of the car and I told him what happened. He got on the and a radio and he said to me, lady, you are so lucky because the only reason I'm here is because they're filming a commercial up there. And there's been no traffic except an hour ago there was one motorcycle. And I was like in this state of no, it was God. It was God. And they just said, oh, she's in shock. And I know it was God. It was God. And I always read Guidepost magazines and I had one in my purse of people with these kinds of stories. So I knew, that's why I knew say Jesus, but I couldn't say it, but it was one of those stories. And I knew this is God, this is God. So anyway, they did catch the guys as they were coming out of the mountain. And after the hospital, they took me to the police station where my husband and my father came to meet me. And I ran up to my father because, I was his little girl and hugged him, threw my arms around him, and he couldn't even touch. He was as stiff as a board. And I was confused with that. And then my husband took me to my mom's house and my dad's to get my child. And my mother said to me, now I have this to think about every year on my birthday.
Sharon.
Well, that was my mom. You're never going to get my daughter. You're alive. I've ruined her birthdays. I mean, I was just a menace to her life.
Well, can we pause on this one too? Just to say there was nobody there for you. No compassion there. A trauma made more traumatic after again. Once again. I'm sorry. How I wish we could rewind your life and just meet each one of these differently.
Well, I think in a way I have, because it's been so many years. I understand it. Understand, for all I know, my mother was one of my, what do they call it? Like, she was programmed to program me, and she just couldn't. She just couldn't. And she had, understanding incest more in her own sick narcissistic personality. They don't look at themselves. They just can't see themselves and the truth of themselves. So it's got to be my fault. Everything's my fault. I do all these things to make her miserable because she's miserable. And so even though she found God, she was very slow to grow in that. Um, and I always felt bad. I mean, I always felt like, made me feel like I'm sorry. And it took me a long time to get to a point where God said, I had one time where I woke up in the morning and this voice yelled at me, "It's not your fault." Because I thought every time something bad happened, it had to be my fault. It was so funny.
Sure.
Like, okay. And whenever I
But
made
again, today we're looking at you. Today we're focusing on you, and nobody was there for you. I mean, everybody around you is responding because of whatever,
well,
but nobody was there for you.
my husband was very affected by it. Um, where he was always just doing his own thing. He went on the usual 3 months of um, on good behavior for me. I'm so grateful you're here. Like every time I would leave him, he would be on good behavior and then it would all just disappear. So he was in his way celebrating that I was alive. He was the protector. He had that personality and he cared. And so even though he was not good at showing compassion, I could see that he felt it.
And how old were you?
I was 23. Oh, you know what I wanted to say too, because this is so good. When I was still at home, probably when I was 17 in that year, we were talking about God at the dinner table, and my dad said, "There's no such thing. That's just a crutch for weak people to lean on." And I thought, well, I'm weak. I'm weak. I need God. So all that was happening at the same time. And then because I had these constant panic attacks, I mean, I was in constant fear of people. I was agoraphobic. It got to the point I couldn't even go to the market or see somebody while I was taking my baby for a walk. I went into this complete panic mode. I had to keep focusing on Jesus. So I called it the thorn in my side, which was so perfect. And because as Second Corinthians says, his strength is made perfect in our weakness. And boy, I didn't know that verse at that time, but he showed it to me over and over and over. So that is obviously a favorite of mine. And I just love that, because then when I really started, learning his thorn, and I said, well, I know what my thorn was. My thorn was those panic attacks, because if I didn't have them, I, would have just been doing my thing. And so they really forced me into having to rely on Jesus 100%. And more was to come as time went on. So, I just, in my marriage, because I didn't have really that partner, that was there. He was pretty much gone. I just, Jesus became my husband. He's the one that I talked to and I had to turn to mostly when it got real tight like that with AA. So what happened was my mom suggested I go to Al-Anon because of my husband's drinking. So I did, and I felt like, yeah, I relate to these people, but I also relate to the alcoholic. Kind of relate to both. I'm in the middle. So I thought, and then I would ask myself, can you go without a drink for 30 days? And I said, no, I don't think. I know I can't do that. So that's when I went to AA. And from the first time I went, Lord just lifted my obsession to drink. And so it's where he wanted me. And when I became sober, I guess you would say I was on a pink cloud because life just, for me, became perfect. I loved my life. I didn't have alcohol in me anymore. I had to be a stay-at-home mom. My marriage wasn't good, but everything else looked fabulous, And I just loved getting out of bed every day to be the mother and take care of my home. I'm a true homemaker. And so, and I just prayed for my marriage. I prayed for my husband. I prayed for him to get sober. I prayed for him to become a Christian. And well, really, to back up a little bit, what sent me there was I kept praying for him to get sober, and then God put me in a position to say, "Well, you have to go get sober." So I went, and I got sober, and 2 months later, he got sober, and he's been sober ever since. So that was a miracle. And I thought that then our marriage would be great. And he'd be, spending more time with me and celebrating my birthday, maybe take me out for my birthday. No, none of that happened. So that's when I really just had to turn to God for everything. And as my husband, because he just even sober, he wasn't the husband that I needed. He wasn't capable of that. He didn't have desire to do that. So anyway, in AA, I'm 27, and this is a nice few years as far as I'm concerned. And I'm hearing these stories of people, and I'm thinking, I just don't have a drunk-a-log like that. I don't really have a story. I mean, I can tell this little short testimony, but I just don't. And then after being sober 3 years, my sponsor said, who, by the way, my sponsor was another mother, another woman just like my mother, a total narcissist.
No.
But she looked perfect, and she sounded perfect what she talked about, but there was no compassion at all. And so when she said, you need to do your 4th step, and, usually people, I think they do that in their first year. I move slow in that program.
What's the 4th step?
4th step is you go through and you have to really take a hard look at yourself. And you have to write down, and they have questions that you have to answer. If any of these things happen in your life, or if you hurt people, you have to go and make amends to them, and, all these things. And so I got to this question that mentioned bestiality. And it was kind of up there, and it just freaked me out. I became so sick to my stomach, and I didn't understand why. And I couldn't put this book down. I don't know where I'm going. I could not continue with that. I mean, I was stuck, and I told her. And it took me, I don't know how long. It took me a long time to get through it, but it just kind of stuck with me like, what is this? What is this? And actually, it was in that year, starting 6 months before my memory, that things started to bubble up, let's say. Bubble up, and I knew what's going on, what's going on. And then all these spiritual things were happening to me. And it really started triggering my memories. And then I went through a spiritual warfare just before I could feel demons. I'd went on a retreat during that time with my sponsor, and there was a demon in the bedroom at night, which a lot of times there were. And I would just say, Jesus, Jesus. I would just say, G, and it'll go away. And so I'd lost my dog, my beloved dog, in Havasu. And we were out in Havasu. We had a place out there, and we had to leave, come home without her. And somebody kidnapped her. And I was afraid that a satanic cult got her. I didn't know why I thought that, But I guess it was during that time that you started to hear some of the, like the McMartin case on the news. But I just thought, oh my God, what if a cult got her? And I was devastated. Like I lost my own baby. So devastated. And I thought it was my fault because I loved her too much. And you cannot love anyone more than God. Not that I loved her more than God, but I thought if she, I don't, well, somebody just that day on the boat said, your dog is so beautiful. And I said, oh, I know. And they were asking me all these questions. I said, I don't know what I'd do without her because she was my security blanket. She really was. She was my, my little compassion. I adored my daughters, but she was just that, my little soulmate dog. And I knew because when I had my first baby, when she was just 3 days old, we had to take her to the emergency. And it was really for a silly reason, but I was so scared that she was going to die. And I thought, Lord, if she dies, I'll die. If she dies, I'll die. And God said, she is mine. She is mine. And I have given her to you to take care of. And it was like, I know, it's like, you can't, she's in God's hands and all that's in God's hands. And so that was a very, important lesson I learned there. But this dog I had become obsessed with. And I knew that was strange, but God was trying to once again show me something. So this was really a big deal because the dog went, I was completely devastated to the point where I just didn't want to live. I couldn't eat. And my husband kept saying, you have to just keep moving forward. And she had tags and phone number and there was nothing. And he did everything. These are one of these things that showed that how much he cared is because he got me that dog and he went back there to have us. So he did everything in his power to find her, talk to every place, the police, everything. And so the next weekend, during that week, I have to share this because it's so wonderful. So a few days in, I could barely move. I mean, it was like I did something and then I had to lay down and cry. And so I got up I would write these donation checks to the 700 Club. And God said to me, write your prayer request on the back. And I was like, what? And he says, write your prayer request on the back. So I wrote, please pray that I get my dog back. And right at that moment, every bit of grief, and I was filled with grief. Like if somebody, I don't want to put it to somebody actually losing their child, but it was that deep. And he took all of my grief at that moment. And I knew he filled me. He filled me like when I was kidnapped. And I knew I was going to get her back. And I stood up and I was filled with the Holy Spirit. And I stood outside and I was like one with everything, like the breeze. I was one. It was like for the next week, I had this Holy Spirit. I wish I could always be like that, just in me. I saw love in everybody. It was it was so great. And then he started to give me signs and show me how I was getting the dog back. And I knew when. Anyway, that weekend, my husband went out to pass out flyers in Havasu. So he was out of town and there was a demon. I mean, a huge demon, a very powerful demon in my bedroom. And I could feel it. I'd never experienced anything like this. And I haven't since, thank goodness. But this demon, we had two trees in two opposite corners of the bedroom. And this demon was just flying around. And then it would land in a tree. And then it'd fly around, land in the other tree. And I was so scared. I was so scared. I just kept saying, you get out of here. I didn't know anything about spiritual warfare, but this is my first experience with spiritual warfare. I said, you don't belong here. This is God's house. This is God's house. In Jesus' name, you get out of here. It just wouldn't leave. I mean, it went on and on. I don't know how long, but I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to go crawl in bed with my daughter. And this voice said, you leave your kids out of this. And then I thought, and then I did more warfare. And I thought, I'm going to call my sponsor. And I said, this is between the three of us. And I was like, oh. And so I was standing on the bed and I was like, get out, get out. And it just went and went and went for as long as it did. And then it started to die down. And I could feel it losing its power. And I just lay down and I wrapped Jesus around me and I could feel its face right up to my face, just breathing in my face. And it got weaker and weaker and I fell asleep. And the next morning, I was like this totally refreshed person.
Wow.
I was like, I I was like, wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. And of course, then I shared it in my AA meeting, and that apparently was not cool. So my sponsor, my sponsor just didn't like me. And so anyway, it was right after that the memories came. And they came, a lot of things triggered it, but I was making my daughter's bed. And she was 6 years old at the time at school. And my father, I did get my dog back. And my daughter, my husband, my father had raped me. And was so I was 31 when this happened. I was 27 when I got sober. I was 31 and it was 1990. So I didn't know all this stuff was happening, that people were remembering this stuff then. And we didn't have the internet, but I just thought this, was me because I'm crazy. And so I was so completely distraught. And it was just the knowledge. It was just the knowledge that couldn't I had these 2 little girls and I thought, I can't take care of them. I can't even, I was hysterical. And I called my sponsor, and she said that she wasn't gonna help. She said, she actually, after the retreat, she says, I think you need to go to therapy, because I told her about the memory of my grandfather in Holland. And I just said it like it was nothing. So I guess she thought, oh, there must be more there. I think this girl needs therapy. Everything's fine with me. Everything's good with me. And so I had signed up that I was going to start some outpatient therapy. So I called the place and they sent me to a psych ward. And I found somebody to take my daughters and for the afternoon. And I called my husband and said, you need to come take me to this ward. And he did. And as soon as he pulled in the parking lot, I just started seeing things that the principal raped me, which I did get confirmation just this year that yes, he was a pedophile.
Wow.
And it was going on at my elementary school. But I thought he was part of my dad's cult. And that I saw that a cousin had raped me, and that my father and my 2 uncles, which were my mother's brothers, they were all wearing satanic black robes with conical black hoods. And um weirdly, this voice said, your dad is the high priest, which I have a hard time imagining as a high priest because he didn't seem to be a leader in any way. But who knows? Maybe they have different recommendations for that. I don't know. But I just started to flood, just flooding. And early that day when I was still home, I noticed that I had a whole series of bruises up the side of my thigh at my buttocks. And I just had no idea how that happened. But, I think it was body memories, because once I checked in, the medical doctor came in just to look me over, and he said, do you have any bruises? And I was like, no, no. Like, you have to hide this, you got to hide these things. And, little things like when I was on my bed, there was the teeniest, wintiest little spider, and I just about flipped out. So that was a trigger. And it just was flooding. And I was there 11 days, and they told me when I checked out. So what happened too was that my husband and I had gotten a $10,000 tax return that year. We'd never gotten anything like that. We didn't have savings really. And I thought, wow, we got money. And so I donated 500 to a woman's recovery home with my husband's permission. And I thought, oh, now we have money in the savings, and maybe we can really take a vacation. Maybe we could go to Hawaii. And the next thing I know, I go in this hospital, and the day that I checked out, the bill was $9,000. And so, but God supplied. That's the point.
Did you talk to them about your dad and the robes and the hats and all that?
Yeah, that I don't know if they were part of the cover up or what, but I don't know how much I talked to them. I was supposed to just keep writing everything down. What happened was, okay, let me go back in there. I went into oh, well, just to finish that part up, when I checked out, paid the bill, they said, this psych ward is always full. But the day you came in, it emptied. And now you're leaving and it's filling back up again. So God just created this space. He gave us the money. He just put me there. It all happened. It was all, I feel like the rape, like the kidnap. Like God was there. It's going to be okay. I'm going to heal you from this. So, and I was healed from that. I wasn't trying. As a matter of fact, I had no more fear. Um, so what happened, so I'm flooding with all these, and I'm just writing in my journal. And then they send me to biofeedback. And as soon as I sat down and the therapist or whatever he is starts to put these electrodes on me, I am triggered. And I'm seeing all kinds of paranormal things. And one of the things that came out of my mouth was, they robbed me of my memory. They robbed me of my memory. So, later I looked at the therapist and I said, tell me, what I'm talking about. Cause it was just all this bizarre stuff. And he said, no, I've not had that experience. So then I sat outside and I said, Jesus, what's going on? And at that moment, I split into two. It's like I was sitting there, but I was up in the sky. So what it was, he was showing me two places at once, like you can be there and you can be here. I don't know what it was, but he showed me that he was there. He knew what was going on. And so I just kept writing. And then on another day, it came down to the worst of the satanic memories that explained a lot of my life, but and it had to do with a baby being taken. I'm not sure whose baby. And of course, I have lots of memories that I'm just now starting to work on getting the rest of my memories. But this baby was then, in the memory came out, it was mine. And then but it was so off the charts. And I was so hysterical that, the nurses came in and I was just screaming uncontrollably. And then they said, we have to drug you. We have to drug you. You have to take this. And I'm like, no, I was scared to death of drugs. I never wanted to take drugs. Alcohol, yes, but no drugs. And so, they said, you have to, because I was just so hysterical. So I succumbed. And when that pill went in my body, I immediately recognized the feeling. And my body just went, I could feel it going like down into this. It had to be like this, an elephant tranquilizer. I don't know, but that was pretty severe. And so then they made me call my father in and confront him
No.
about the therapist. And I wrote a letter, and I didn't even mention the satanic stuff. I only mentioned the incest. And I'm telling you, it was like a setup. He sat there and a tear trickled down his eye. And he said, oh, no. And then he says, your mother was frigid. And he said, and I didn't do that. And the therapist, who was just like his wife, my stepmother, said it was all a Freudian fantasy. That's what she tells me, that it was Freudian fantasy. And I was like, oh, and I would have preferred to be crazy than for any of it to have been true.
Sure.
But I'm a mother, 2 little kids. I have Jesus. I don't want to die, but I can't live with the fact that I would have made this up, because I would never, ever make up this story. And basically I was treated as though I made it up for attention. Because my husband's father had just passed away shortly before my memories hit, which was all part of triggers. And I just wanted attention. And as far as my dad, that was just my repressed fantasies.
And that goes back to what your mom always said, right?
Well, my mom, no,
Because she used to say you were making things up for attention if you were sick.
I did things when I had to wear and I did it for attention. Yes. And, that's one thing. I never would do anything for attention. Ever. I was too insecure.
And if you're going to make something up for attention, it wouldn't be this.
Would not be that.
No. Wow. I am
So,
flabbergasted. I mean,
but look at this. Then we get up to leave. We've all decided
because now you're fixed. Now you're fixed.
and my
right?
dad pats my butt. I'm 31 years old, and he pats my fanny, which he has an obsession with, and says, "Oh, can I still do this?" And she just laughs. And then
right in front of her.
yeah.
So your Freudian fantasy includes him patting your butt. Okay.
By the way, when I first told my parents that I was pregnant with my first child, they said my father's first remark was, "Oh, we're going to have another cute little fanny." They were obsessed with fanny. My uncle even took movies of me showing off my fanny. I mean, it's kind of like, and to me, that, of course, was normal. And then when I showed it to my adult daughter, she's like, "Mom, that's not normal." Okay. He had this obsession. So yeah. So then I'm really going crazy because I'm like, what is real? What's not real? Lord, what's going on? And I had my Bible with me, and he was showing me things in the Bible. And he showed me that I had the gift of dreams and dream interpretation. And he did speak to me very strongly, starting just before that, showing me, like, my sponsor was always so cruel to me.
I'm sorry. I'm stuck.
I'm sometimes amazed too, but that's, I stay alive for Jesus.
I mean, these words.
Nobody until you. Okay. Well, my first therapist was compassionate, and he almost fell off his chair when I told him my memories, and I told him, but they're not real. And that's when I realized, oh my God, that's the first time I realized this really did happen. But
you know that these groups work together.
Yeah, I know that now.
In a network, which sounds so much like, because the message was, you are creating a fantasy, you're causing trouble, you're trying to bring attention to yourself, because the therapist said this. It's the same message your mom was sending you. It's this exact same message to me, says, and for him to touch your butt in front of her and say, well, can I still do this? And she's like, yes, you can. There are warning bells all over that thing.
Did not realize until just in this past year of listening to podcasts how widespread, even my aunts were part of the checking in on me. Everybody's in on it, but I didn't know that. I just didn't know that then. I didn't understand any of this. I just thought, it's God told me while I was in the hospital that this was a multi-generational, the sins of the father. He showed it in the Bible. He said, this is multi-generational in your family. Yeah. So I never heard these words before, but I knew it ran in my family because my grandfather, the Opa, was evil. I even saw red eyes come out of his picture. And I did learn that when he passed away, my mother had told me this too, my father was with him, and he had a look of terror on his face. So then when I saw the movie Ghost, I said, yeah, that's what happened. The demons came and took him because he was flat out evil. And so he must have passed it down to my father, making him the high priest or whatever. I still don't have.
Sure.
I don't have, I'm going to start retrieving those memories. But up until this date, the doors were always closed on me. So
when you left the hospital, did you buy I'm Just Crazy? Or were you like, oh no, I know this is true?
I didn't know. I thought I was crazy, but there was clues, because then there was a family night, and you're supposed to invite your loved ones. Well, my mother and I were estranged at the time. She stopped talking to me because I was an unloving daughter, because I finally said no to her on something. My husband happened to be out of town in San Francisco, satanic town up there. And so I called my father because he loved me and he would never do that, right? So I called him. I said, "Could you please come? It's family night." And he said, "No, I have to get my hair cut." And I knew, my common sense said, well, that's a really lame excuse. You know, your daughter is in a psych ward having these horrific, and you don't want to come and support her, right? And so, yeah, but I still didn't, because it was all so crazy. And this was stuff that I had never been aware of before. And, you know, all the paranormal things and all the satanic stuff, I didn't know anything about these memories I was having. And then after that, my father kept shaming me. He kept consistently, you know, you really hurt me. You really hurt me by, and this went on, and I just kept carrying more guilt and more guilt. I don't, you know, only Jesus has helped this poor body. But my fibromyalgia is so bad now. It's this pain, just let me out, let me out. And so it is this pain that I carried for them. And so, of course, looking back, I see it was all my aunts. And then I didn't see anything on TV or hear anything. I mean, I was a mother with young kids, so I wasn't, you know, I wanted peace and quiet. Everything was about the kids. And so apparently it came out was that the whole satanic panic and all these people having memories of these things. And
Bad timing of that for you.
my aunt calls me and it says, "Oh, I'm just psychotic. There's a, you know, these shows that say, you know, this isn't real." And so,
Had it come out that you had memories of
yes,
the satanic stuff? Okay.
it was out. I mean, my dad must have been, I don't know what was shared with all the relatives, but obviously they all knew about it. And so my mother and I ended up connecting again. And when I told her, you know, and she would go on and on about all the, you know, that she felt evil in my dad. And sometimes she'd sleep with a cross and a rosary under her pillow because she was so scared. And I said, "So can't you believe that he would do these things?" No, don't you talk about it. I mean, she would get out of her chair and scream at me, "You don't ever say that." And you know what? I finally in this past year realized they have sworn so much to the secrecy. Both my aunts on both sides of the family, and the last one just passed away a couple months ago. And that, and I confronted her through, you know, she was in the Netherlands, and she wouldn't say anything, but she got somehow, she liked a remark I made on somebody else who is connected to your SRA site that somehow was public. It wasn't on your site, it was on another site. And I didn't even know how she could find it because she never remarks on anything on Facebook. And it was said everything to me that she knew. And my other aunt, my mom's sister, after my mother passed away, she passed away shortly after that because she just couldn't face it. It was too much. And she said, "We need to stay close now." And I just honestly took it as, well, we're all that's left. So she wants to stay close to me. But now I realized, no, she was, what do you call it? Like monitoring, and she, again, didn't, I wasn't allowed to say anything. She talked to me as if I was messed up in the head and I should just be happy and nothing ever happened. But she had a secret and she was going to tell me that secret, but not then. And I think it was the secret about, yes, these things happen, but she died before she ever said it. So both my aunts, I feel in a sense, in a roundabout way, I got a validation, but they could never, like, they are so, like, you're on your deathbed or you're so close to death. Why would you do that for me? But they're just programmed. No, no. And so, I never could, I could just never speak about it. I was just afraid to speak until I started to see you and other survivors speaking on YouTube. And then God gave me my voice. He gave it to me not this January, but January after that. And I went to the church and they just, "No, we can't help you," sent me away. And I was just getting that again. I went to a therapist and it was out above their pay rate or whatever, their experience. And I wanted to speak. I wanted to meet. I've always wanted to meet another survivor. And as I tried through the years, the doors just kept slamming in my face every time. And so I knew that everything is in God's hands. He's the one who opens and closes doors. So, you know, watching you and then going on and buying your book, which I apparently already have because now I have 2 of them. And then going on the Facebook site was just a godsend. And then, of course, Susan getting me to the retreat and getting to meet you was just a miracle. I mean, it was a miracle. And I knew because God had been giving me dreams. This is the time. This is the time. And so all these years, I went through about 20 years after I divorced my husband. God took me out of that marriage. And I said, why, Lord? Why? When I prayed and prayed, and we actually even got baptized together in that last year. And so I thought, yay, nothing, this is great. But still, I don't know if there was mind control there too. But could be. That's something that never dawned on me until recently. God knew more than I knew. And it was not a good place for me to be in order to deal with this. I needed to be alone because nobody like you, I had nobody who was really being compassionate and helping me. So, and I did have a therapist at that time. I had started seeing that therapist and I knew then that I had to just leave my husband, not because the therapist said that, but he was so compassionate and so kind that it was the first time I ever felt it. And, I loved him. What can I say? And it was extreme. So, his point, I didn't really, I got enough to know that all this stuff was real. And then I quit seeing him after a while because, after a year or two, because I just felt like my emotions were too strong to work to get memories, but really it just wasn't time. So what he did, I would just have him hold me. And then I learned when I learned of Van Buren, the Miss America, then I saw her, then I got her book, and she said, if you meet a survivor, just hug them. They need hugs. And I realized, wow, that's what I'm thinking. I want memories. I want memories. But I needed hugs. I needed hugs. And he just told me, and I knew he knew, like, you're with me. He was with me. He was with me. And of course, that was like such a strong connection. I couldn't believe it. He knew he'd been abused too. So it was that same energy going on there. So I knew that this is real. He's the one that actually, but until then I was feeling guilty. So I was feeling really guilty. My father kept shaming me. And apparently him and my dad were talking behind my back. My husband and my dad were talking behind my back about this. And I didn't know until later. My
Wow.
brother told me years later, and my husband would bring the girls to see him because I wouldn't. I just cut them all off. I cut them off when I knew. Well, what actually happened was when my father found out I was in therapy, he talked to me, he calls me and look, I hadn't thought about this in so many years, but like I'm his little girl, how's my little girl doing? I think that's something like that. He says, well, I said, well, not so good, Dad. And he says, no, why not? And I said, well, I'm in therapy. He said, why? To discuss what happened between us. And he says, well, I have a lot to say about you, young lady. And he slammed the phone down. And that was the end of that. We were estranged for many years. I did eventually go back to him at one point, and I would visit him for a year, like once a month or something. And what I saw, I was always hoping for reconciliation because I always want everyone to heal. It was my dream. I thought my purpose. And I heard that. I don't know if that was in one of your podcasts or who, but I was like, it was my purpose to heal everybody, because Jesus is for me, it's possible. And so I'm always this very forgiving person. And I understood that this is passed down, that they were victims. It was always clear in my head. But no, what I got to see was somebody that I needed to steer really clear from. And and then we became estranged, and then he passed away on July 4th, Independence Day, in 2020. And so knowing that he was off the planet was a relief. When my mother passed, it was a relief too. I felt good and lifted, and I knew because our relationship, we had grown, kind of together in some ways, and then it was no way. And she was doing everything in her power to squash me. So I knew that relationship, I felt it was full circle. And I just felt like just a relief and free. I felt free. So when my dad passed away, I felt really free.
Oh, I'm sure. So
And
how does it feel to have a voice, to be able to talk about it now and have that confidence?
grateful. It's like God just opened my mouth then. And I'm not afraid. And too, I can see now. It's really the Esther thing. After I've been really studying the Bible since 2015, I could see how my experiences and all the things Jesus showed me and taught me all fell in there. And then I kind of could see the whole picture with the Bible, and I knew it, and I had it in my heart. I always had this passion to get this out and talk about Jesus, but the doors, and yeah, I tried to do things on my own, which were always failures, but I always thought that God said, I'm going to do it through you. I'm going to do it through you. So put your ego away, and, so I said, well, I know it's just going to be your time, and that this will happen. And it is. But I went through so many years, I said 20 years, what I call, after I was divorced, I was in the world, living on my own with my two little girls for the first time. All I had was Jesus, nothing else, no one else. But in those years, I had to totally rely on him. And he was everything, my provider, my everything. And he taught me there is no other person. No, you need nothing but me. And then I would still think, well, I need a job, but the jobs would come and go. No, it's not the job. He sustains me. And the husband, I always thought you need a husband, because I kept thinking, well, where's my husband? Because I thought, well, I'm going to remarry a man who's going to support me. And then I'm going to move on with this, finish my healing up, because he'll be there at my side, because it's so traumatic, I'll need that. And I will then write the book and share my story. And that never happened. So I learned that, nope, it's not a husband. And although a real godly one would be good, but it's not through your job, it's not through your money, it's not through your investments. I've been laid off through the difficult times of our economic situation. I mean, I've been through it all, and I now know I've gone through it all. And he's literally walked me through every fear that I had to go through. Like, I'm not going to be able to handle that. But like when my mother died and I had to do all the, her service, and I did it. I did everything, and it strengthened me and strengthened me. And then, but I was always afraid to speak. I always, quietly said a little bit, and then to check the water. But it wasn't right until it was right. I said, I don't care. I'm not people pleasing anymore. He opened my mouth, but it was because I needed the strength of other survivors and overcomers. And you.
Thank you. It makes a difference. It helps to have other survivors, to hear their stories, to see how sadly your story fits in with everybody else.
And I always wanted that. I knew when Jesus told me that in the hospital, I said, Lord, how could I have survived all this? How? And he said, because I was with you. And he said, you are going to be a writer. And I said, oh, I love to be a writer, because I love books about these sorts of stories where people overcame horrible situations with God. And I said, Lord, then I'll be someone and my husband will respect me. Because at that time too, you have to remember, being a homemaker was my joy. It's all I wanted to be. But at the time, women were poo-pooing that. Like, no, you were nothing if you were homemade. But I knew that I always wanted that. And I still am today. I mean, that's who I am. And he said, you already are someone. And put away your ego, because I'm going to be writing through you. And then he showed me going off on a plane, and he said, and you will be a speaker. And I, oh no, no. I said, Lord, you don't understand. I'm a homemaker. I can't get up in front of people and speak. And you got the wrong person. And he says, no, I'll prepare you. So I kept thinking that it was up to me to somehow make this happen. But I also knew that, no, you don't do it. I read enough stories, testimonies from other people about God does it, right? And we had a lot of stuff to cover. And really, just like Esther, such a time as this is the time. I'm older now. Who cares? What have I got to lose? They want to shoot me down, they can shoot me down. I'm going to get it out there. And I know where I'm going. I've lived my life. And now it's time to do this. And this is the time of truth, as we see in our government and things are getting exposed. And now I know these things are not shocking to me because you come from a satanic cult. No, it's infiltrated all over the place. And the Bible, you know. And so I knew this was his time all along. And I kept thinking that I screwed up. I kept apologizing in these years. Did I do something wrong? Oh, I did sin again, Oh. And I said, I'm sorry. I don't want to fail you, Lord. But I had journals and journals of writing. I call them the dark night of my soul years because I was just felt like nothing was happening. But I also was going into the new age, So now I know because of a lot of the paranormal experiences that I had, there wasn't anything in the Christian sections there, and the only books were in the New Age. So I start reading that, and I can read some of my experiences there, and I identify, and I get sucked right into it. So I get it. I get how easily, if you're not walking strong with Jesus totally, and in that Bible, it's going to happen. And that's why we see it in Revelation, the apostasy. That's why people are more the universe. I used to say that too. I always had my cross. Oh, by the way, I have to tell you about this cross. But when people would see my cross and they'd say, "Are you a Christian?" I would say, "I'm a child of God," because I didn't like the church, because the church I felt was hypocritical in my experiences of being there. And I didn't want to identify. I was very judgmental myself, and I was kind of going in the wrong belief. So I feel like when I had my moment of realization that I was wrong, and oh my God, and I knew it, God came down on me, and I just repented, threw away every single book, anything in my house that was not of the Bible, wasn't of Jesus. And I got it. It's like, I almost feel like I was allowed to, like the rape, I was allowed to, and Jesus was with me. I think he's protected me through all of it. He's never let harm come to me, but it's so that I can experience it and see what's really going on. Like having been kidnapped and raped was a blessing, and that for me, it was the setup for these memories. Like people would say to me, relatives, they would say nothing like, you should just forgive your dad. That's what they always say, forgive your dad. Not that I hadn't forgiven him, because God told me, I know. But it wasn't like I was resenting my dad. I just don't want to be around him. I'm afraid of him. He's a perpetrator. But people would say, but that rape. And I say, how can you say to me, it's a horrible thing that a stranger did this to me, but it's just something, it was no big deal if your own family's doing it to you, which is worse to me, the family. So that set me up for that. And it said, this has happened to, yes, I was kidnapped many times. Yes, I was raped many times. These things happen. There were people coming down the hall. Yes, I was made to take drugs, and the family doctor was involved in it. And I'm kind of more and more things are coming to me as far as that goes. So pieces are starting to come, and hopefully soon I'll be getting some memories too to put more pieces together.
It is so true that people look at stranger rape as so much worse than being raped by our family or being ritually abused by our family.
And with those guys, they got 10 years in prison. And whenever I would get afraid or think, is that a rapist? I would just pray. I would pray for them, pray that they would get healing in prison. And that's what I did. And so I felt really set up because I prayed for my parents. I prayed for my family that they would get saved. And I really hoped that would happen. And it didn't. Well, my mother, I believe I'll see again. My father, no. And that's just the way it is. And I don't really know because I wasn't there when he died. Would have been interesting to see what look he had on his face.
Yeah, that it would. Well, Sharon, you give us so much to think about And your story is just, it's an amazing trip through your life, and to see how you give God the glory and how He was really there with you, even in the really hard times and things that are hard to understand. Even then, you held on to Him in such beautiful ways. So thank you. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you for allowing me to.
It's an honor to have you here. Honor to have you here, and an honor to get to meet you in person. That was amazing. That was amazing.
I will see you again next April.
Yes, if you would like to come join us, Call to Peace Ministries is an incredible Christian ministry to people that are healing from domestic abuse, coercive control relationships. And they meet every year in May in Lake Junaluska. And I'll have it on my website if you go to Facebook. And the early bird registration ends, I believe, September 30th, although you can keep registering, I think, up until maybe March. And it's expensive, so start saving up for it, but well worth it. You can meet me there. Rebecca Davis will also be speaking. We'll be speaking once, I believe. We have one session on Saturday, but would love to meet you. I'll be there. It's Thursday through Sunday. So we'll have a lot of times to sit and talk, and I would love to get to know you. And there is security there. And when we have a session, there'll be security there specifically to keep an eye on us. So if you're worried about handlers, somebody there, there are people that know about that, and they are there to keep us safe, which is one of the reasons I trust Call to Peace, and I'm willing to go and speak there, because generally I don't do this sort of thing. I would love for you to come and meet me, and love to meet you, because I think it's important for us to have these face-to-face conversations and get to know each other. It's important for our community. So Sharon, it was a delight to meet you. Thank you for being here today, and God bless you as you continue to heal. And I'm really glad that you're facing your past and getting free of it.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here today with us and for sharing with us in Sharon's story. God bless you.
Only God could rescue me. Only God could set me free. Only God. Only God. Only God.